Good evening. My name is Sean Ulmer. I'm Executive Director here at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, and I want to welcome you to One Night Stand, another in a series of monthly programs that we're doing by Zoom, where we look at one work of art by one artist for one night. An idea we shamelessly stole from Intuit, a museum in the Chicago area, which does the same thing, looking at a work of art either from their collection or one that's currently on view. And we thought the idea was brilliant. And we said, well, why not just sort of do it too? So we started this up in the fall, in September. And this is our third in this series. And we'll keep doing it as long as people are continue to be interested in taking a look at the works that we've selected. Tonight, we're going to be looking at John Buck's print, Phoenix. What am I saying? Phoenix Rising. Excuse me, and we'll be looking at it in some depth and talking a little bit about John Buck and other works that he's created and how he came to be in this particular genre of art making. And for that, I've pulled together a series of images that I put together in a PowerPoint. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so it says that you can all see this screen, and so I'm going to trust that it is correct. John Buck is the artist we're going to talk about tonight, and the work in particular that we're going to look at is called Phoenix Rising. It's a work from 2006. It is a large woodblock print, and it's a piece that we acquired in 2009. And it was a purchase made possible by our Collector Circle group. We have a group at the museum called Collector Circle. It's an add-on fee that members pay to be part of this group, and we gather several times throughout the year to look at exhibitions together or to talk about acquisitions and a variety of programs. And the money that is attached to being part of this group is set aside in an account, and we grow it over a couple of years. And then when there seems to be a significant enough amount of money in that account, then the Collector Circle group makes a purchase for the museum from a selection brought together by the curator. And in 2009, this was the piece that they acquired for the museum that we're going to be talking about today. It is currently not on view, but it has been on view several times. It is a work on paper, so it cannot be on view perpetually. It needs to rest from time to time, and it's in that phase right now. But there is, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, there is a wonderful John Buck print that is on view, not Phoenix Rising, but a different one that you can enjoy if you come to the museum as a part of a temporary show borrowed from a private collection. Let's get this to advance here. There we go. So hopefully you can see my screen. So here's a picture of John Buck working on one of his woodblock prints. You can see he uses a series of panels of wood that are sort of joined together, and then he works directly onto the surface. He likes to do it this way because he can use something as simple as a ballpoint pen to create his designs. So you can see him working on that currently, not this print in particular, but a different one that he was working on. John Buck is married to another artist, Deborah Butterfield. I should give you a little bit of history of John Buck right now. He was born actually in Ames, Iowa in 1946. He received his Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the Kansas City Art Institute in 1968. In 1971, he studied at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Skowhegan, Maine. In 1972, he received a Master of Fine Arts degree from the University of California at Davis, which is where he met his future wife, the artist Deborah Butterfield. And the two of them divide their time between their studio ranch in Bozeman, Montana, and studios that they have on the island of Hawaii. Some of you may be more familiar with Deborah Butterfield's work than you are with John Buck's work, simply because it's been more sort of out in the public realm. Here is an image of one of Deborah Butterfield's works with her standing next to it. She's well known for these series of sculptures that she's created of the horse form in metal, oftentimes found scrap metal that she has then sort of fabricated into this form. Or more commonly, she is known for these horse forms that seem to be made out of driftwood. And I think that she did initially make a couple of horses out of driftwood, but she soon learned that she could cast that driftwood into bronze and patinate it in a way that made it look like driftwood. And that's what you're looking at here. This is actually a bronze sculpture that's made to look like driftwood, patterned after driftwood. And so this is a kind of a piece that could stand up to the elements outdoors in a way that actual driftwood would not. So she's famous for these work, but she's not the subject of our conversation today. I just wanted to let you know that John Buck, lives and works in an artistic environment with a wife who is an artist as well, and she works in sculpture. So even though we're going to look at a print by John Buck, it should be well known to you also that John Buck is also a sculptor himself. And he sculpts in wood. Here you see him at work in his studio and with one of his larger sculptures in wood behind him. And I have another image of that. Oh, here's another form of his sculpted wood pieces. This is more of a shadow box piece. This is a flatter work. This might stand maybe 4 to 6 inches off the wall. And you can see that it is three-dimensional, but rather shallow. And this is one form that his sculpture takes. And then larger, almost room-size installations is another form that his sculpture takes. So working with wood, whether it's a woodblock print, or a shadow box form or a large wooden sculpture like this is second nature for John Buck. We are going to talk specifically about his woodblock printmaking tonight, and specifically Phoenix Rising. Here is actually one of John Buck's prints, not Phoenix Rising, but a different one that's being pulled off of a woodblock that you see below it. And so I saw this when I was searching for images for this presentation. I thought, well, this is a really cool image. I want to make sure I included that in it. Even though it's not Phoenix Rising, it is a really, really beautiful example of how he, with his team of people, work on pulling these prints. These are actually the image of Phoenix Rising. And this is a gallery shot at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art back in 2009, in the summer of 2009. The Cedar Rapids Museum of Art did a large 5-gallery installation of prints and sculptures by John Buck. It was a traveling exhibition put together by the Schnitzer Family Foundation. And one of the rooms that we installed this exhibition in, one of the gallery spaces, was dedicated specifically to Phoenix Rising. And so you see on the far left-hand side here, you see the actual wood block that John Buck used. Here, a printing from that block that's just in black and white, and then a series of progressive prints showing how he adds colors to the print itself until he gets to the final form. think I have an example here of those three of those progressions. And so the image on the far right is the image that that is most closely resembles the final piece, which is this piece, Phoenix Rising. So this is our print. It is from a small edition. These are very large prints, as you can probably deduce. John Buck typically will print only 10 copies of a particular print. And this is one of 10 that we have in the collection. And so any of you who are familiar with the Phoenix realize that the Phoenix is not the bird that you see in this image here. The Phoenix is a bird of birth and resurrection. It famously, when it dies, it is reborn, it is rejuvenated, and it is about rebirth and regeneration. This instead is an image of the dodo bird, and I will share with you what John Buck said specifically about this print. He said, this print poses the question, will there be a rebirth of peace, as in the myth of the Phoenix, or will we go the way of the dodo bird to extinction? And that is why in this print, he chose to replace the subject of the print, the Phoenix, with the dodo, a bird that is extinct and represents the fact that we have a choice to make here. Depending on what we do, and do we have a rebirth? Do we have a regeneration, or do we end up going into extinction, like the dodo did? Many of John Buck's prints have a social or political message, and that social and political message is actually oftentimes communicated or relayed to the viewer by way of his background drawings. And so you can see that the dodo is not sitting on this field, this background field all by itself. Instead, there's a lot of activity happening in the background. And I have a few detail shots to share with you, describe some of the work that you would be able to see if you could see the work in person. So I'll give it a second here. Okay, the upper portion of the print, you can see it has kind of two sides to it. On the left-hand side, you have this sort of tower, this sort of series of concentric ring towers, kind of like a Tower of Babel. Oftentimes, historically, the Tower of Babel was represented this way as a series of ascending rings that lead you up to the top. But at the top, you see in this case, there are two arms that come from the top of the tower that are puppet master arms. They have various figures on puppet strings. And these figures are either holding guns or missiles. And so they're very menacing figures. They are cloaked, they're hooded figures, but they are all carrying some sort of weapon. On the right-hand side, you see a kind of traditional country church hovering above an image of the United States Capitol. From the country church, you see again another puppet stand that holds instead on the strings a series of figures that we'll look at in some detail here in a minute. They're a little hard to make out this way. But also the United States Capitol building also has an arm which has puppet strings attached to various figures that look very much like crusaders, figures that have kind of medieval helmets and the cross on the tunic in front. Just below the figures and just above the back of the dodo, you see another group of individuals who are cloaked in very much outfits that look very, very reminiscent of the Ku Klux Klan. These hooded, pointed hooded figures here. So a lot of menacing figures throughout. And that's very much part of the message that John Buck is trying to communicate. These figures come down the sides of the print, and they meet in the center at the bottom. So on the left-hand side, the figures that we saw with machine guns and that are hooded are passing by a structure that is very closely resembles the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. And you see the figures then start to change form. They look more like Middle Eastern figures. And then as they pass through the structure in the foreground, which is sort of a generic kind of mosque form with onion domed minarets, they take on a more Islamic feel, the figures do, more Islamic figures, and they meet at the center underneath the dodo's talons here with the group on the right, which began, as I said, sort of as medieval crusaders, but then go through a fortified gateway and look very Jewish, very traditionally Hasidic Jewish figures. And in the very center, you see that they are shooting at each other. It is very much a print that is questioning sort of man's inhumanity to man, how if we continue to be intolerant of each other, especially as pertains to religion, and we continue to war with one another, that we can very much go the way of the dodo bird, that we can actually cause our own extinction by our intolerance for people of different faiths. And this is very much what's sort of at the basis of John Buck's print here. But it's all sort of relayed in detail, in this finely drawn detail on the prints, and then sort of with this hovering dodo bird, the superimposed dodo bird over the front. So I have a few details, not great images, because our print is framed and glazed, so it's very difficult to shoot through it. But I wanted a little bit of detail here, so you can see some of John Buck's fine line work here. And you can see, because he joins together a series of planks, those planks created, in this case, a series of horizontal lines that transverse the entire print. But while they're there, they don't actually really detract from the composition. The composition still reads very, very clearly. And then I'll hear another detail of it, again with a bit of glare from the glazing. And on the right-hand side, I promised you a little bit more of a detail of the puppet, if you will, that's coming from the country church. And I know it's a little bit difficult to make out, but if you take a careful look at it, it's actually the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And you can see the head of one horseman here, another horseman here wielding a sword, a third horseman here with the scales of justice trailing behind, and then a very old elderly horseman on this side. This is actually a composition that Buck borrows directly from another artist, a historical artist. He borrows the composition from Albrecht Dürer, a late 15th, early 16th century printmaker based in Germany, who was a master woodblock printer, smaller in scale. And here you see Albrecht Dürer's, as he signed right here in the lower center, AD, print of the Four Horsemen. And you can see that Buck is quoting it directly. Here you've got the archer horseman, the horseman with the sword, the horseman with the scales trailing behind, and then the elderly horseman here. And so he's deliberately quoting Albrecht Dürer, another great printmaker, another great woodblock printmaker in this composition. And that's a little detail that is a sort of nod to sort of art history and sort of the idea of the idea of great printmakers, but also those that are dealing with religious imagery. In Albrecht Dürer's imagery, the four horsemen are trotting on these fallen individuals here, the unfaithful. In John Buck's print, they are not really trotting, but they're hovering over this series of Ku Klux Klan looking individuals. And so as a whole composition, there's a lot going on, and it's a wonderful opportunity to look, at a lot of the details, because it is in those details that the real narrative, the real story is being told. If it was just the dodo bird, you would need some sort of a layer of interpretation to make it clear what you were looking at. But with all of this background information, you see these different figures, heavily armed, all coming together again, and with a very strong tie to religions coming together and warring it out. This is, again, a print that's not currently on view, but you can see and enjoy a print that is on view as a part of our Collector's Eye exhibition, which is a private collection that we're featuring right now at the museum. And I think I have an image of that work here. There we go. Yes, Moscow on the Seine. This is the image that you're looking here. It is from the collection of Tom Jackson and Joanne Stevens, who's a local couple who have collected a really extraordinary body of work that they're sharing with the public at this point. This is a very different John Buck, but you can see how similar or how related it is to our Phoenix Rising. In this particular composition, an unknown person in a bear skin strolls along a background of Russian political and historical figures and architectural sites. Among the images, a bare-chested Putin, which you see right over here on horseback, who's trampling on a fallen man here, that you see here, while being crowned by a woman. So you see the crown up here. Still very, very politically relevant to today. Buck was inspired by an illustration of the Russian holiday Maslenitsa, excuse me, not my Russian's terrible, Maslenitsa, which is a celebration that dates back to the 18th century, and figures humans wearing these sort of bear skins. So, but this is another wonderful work by John Buck that that you can see if you come to the museum now, and we will have at some point in the not too distant future, I'm sure, Phoenix Rising back on view again. So I think that might be the last of my slides. So let me get out of here. And come back here. There we go. And so at this point, I would be happy to try to answer any questions that you might have about Phoenix Rising, or hear your thoughts on it.
It looks like there may be a question in the chat.
Okay, let's take a look there. Okay, how does the collector circle decide what item to purchase? Very good question. Part of it is based on how much money we allow to accumulate. In these days, we seem to be needing to set aside more and more money because the art does not seem to be going down in value these days. But once we feel like there's enough money in the kitty to do some damage, the curator kind of looks over her wish list and thinks about, what works would, are reachable by doing, research, and what works makes sense for our collection. What work will be utilized, what works play to our strengths, or alternatively might fill a void in the collection. And so she narrows that down to maybe 3 or 4 options. And then we have a collector circle meeting, acquisition meeting specifically to propose these works, this choice of 3 or 4 options, to talk about how each piece would fit into the collection, why each piece would be important or significant for us, and then and what the price of each work is, and then the collector circle discusses it right there, and then they hold a vote, and then whichever item receives the most votes is the item that the collector circle purchases, and then we put the collector circle name on the credit line for the piece, so that going forward, whenever that piece is shown and the label that accompanies it will say museum purchase made possible by the collector circle.
So this is actually a criticism of religion, right? Assuming the image is supposed to be read from top to bottom. At the top, there's a puppet master in both the bubble and the church.
Yes, and the Capitol building. So it probably better read as multiple puppet masters, each playing. And it's interesting that the church hovers over the Capitol building. Where we pride ourselves on that separation of church and state. In Buck's print, they seem very, very closely interrelated, that the separation between church and state might not be as distinct as we sometimes think it is. So I'm sorry, I cut you off, but I just wanted to jump in there.
But both the image of the Riders of the Apocalypse and the Tower of Babel are religious images.
Absolutely, as is the church, as are the Crusaders.
And therefore it's just one puppet master on both sides of the image, and that's God, right?
No, I would say there has to be multiple puppet masters, because on the Babel side, there's 2 arms, and on the church and Capitol building, there's 2 more arms. So 1 arm on each of those. So I think that there has to be multiple puppet masters in order to.
If I may say, your assumption that God only has 2 arms.
It is, but I'm not sure that God would be the puppet master that would set religions at war with each other.
Well,
I think man is.
Nothing good comes of the Tower of Babel, and nothing good comes out of the church on the, I guess, right-hand side of the image.
Or the Capitol building.
Okay. Now, and you believe that the figures are descending. So whoever comes out of the Tower of Babel becomes the Muslims, and whoever comes out of the church becomes the Jews?
No, I don't believe so. I believe it's a conflation of different figures from different periods in time. So the very first images that you see are very sort of contemporary, on the left-hand side, are very, very contemporary hooded figures with machine guns. And you cannot tell any particular religion, except that they're sort of emanating out of that Tower of Babel image. Then, as figures are kind of coming out from around the Dome of the Rock, they look sort of generically Middle Eastern. And as they pass through that gateway with the minarets, they begin to take on an Islamic feel, about them. And then you've got on the other side, interestingly, kind of an American, I can say, country church and the US Capitol building, but the figures coming out of them look very, very much like crusaders, like European medieval crusaders. So they don't really relate specifically to the Capitol building or to the country church. And then at some point down below, you see more, what I would call more Jewish looking figures coming through a gateway. But I don't believe one's morphing into another, or I don't believe it's a pure linear form. I think it's sort of trying to bring into the conversation all the different ways, past and present, that religions have been fighting each other. And that seems to be a continuum in our society, and that I think it's a cautionary tale of saying, you know, if we are not careful, we let this continue on, then we very well could go the way of the dodo bird.
But we're going to also read that if there's no descension, then the image can also be read from the bottom up.
I think you can. I think you can. It is somewhat circular. I think in that way, and I think you absolutely could start at the bottom and read it up. Yes. I chose from the top down, just because at the very bottom is where you see them actually, interacting with each other. So I felt like narrative-wise, that was the crux's point. But I think in Buck's language, I think it's been an ongoing process for thousands of years. And it's not something that's happening just today, but that has been happening throughout history over and over and over again. I think that by him taking figures from different points in history and mixing them all up together, but then sort of multiplying them so that it looks like they're real forces or large groups of people. He's saying this is something that's happening now, but it's been happening, and it's been happening for many, many years. This is something that we need to be paying closer attention to, or we could very much end up in a way of destroying ourselves.
I also have a question about the creation of this, because I have not seen it live. So the background is the print, and on top of this, he draws the dodo?
No, the whole
thing a print?
Whole thing's the print. And what he will do is like the dodo will be a separate block. And so he will print that, he will reserve that space, but then he will print that in different colors on the white that he's reserved in that space. So some of his woodblock prints, smaller ones, and I think he did it in this case, the background's going to be all one big block, if you will, but the center part will be cut out. And then he will have a dodo shaped block that he will print with. Sometimes with like children's wood toys that are cut out and you can put them together and they create a scene when you're completely done. Some of his prints are done that way, where each piece of the print is a separate piece of wood, and it's printed separately into the whole composition.
Oh, so they can be rearranged differently and reprinted?
He could print the dodo separately on something else, but he can't rearrange the background. And
the ones where he has like separate pieces of the puzzle, he can.
Yes, if it's one of those kind of compositions, he could do that. But in this case, the whole background is one block, and then the middle part is in reserve, and then that's what gets printed separately. So he could print the dodo on something else, but he couldn't. But the rest of it's all one piece that he has combined together.
And with the purchase of the art, that block is also purchased, or just the print?
Just the print, yeah, yeah.
So he can run off more copies.
But he won't. He has limited the edition to 10, and that's where it stays. And so this block, when we showed it at our museum, it was part of an exhibition that was put together by the Schnitzer Family Foundation, and they borrowed that block for the show. But he has no intention, and nor has he since he did those 10 prints, has no intention of printing it again. Many times printers will destroy the block. Once they've reached their number, they'll destroy it, so they can't make any more prints out of it. He, unlike a lot of printers, he keeps his prints number very, very low. And they are large prints. I have seen a couple of prints that he's done that have been in an edition of 15. But at the time that, in the sort of first decade of the 2000s, all of his prints that he was doing were in an edition of 10. And he stuck to that. And he, I don't know if he's still doing this now, but at that time, the price of the print is based on the edition size. So if he runs an edition of 10, if you act quickly and you buy one of the first 3, you will pay a certain amount. If you buy one of the next 3, you'll pay more. And if you buy one of the last 4, you'll pay even more. So it was a way of grading the price, because as the prints sell in order, they become less and less available. And so he set his pricing structure that way. And I don't know if he's still doing it that way or not, but he would, and I think it was kind of a very interesting, somewhat kind of brilliant way of pricing your prints. Obviously, if you do a larger edition, it becomes much harder. But if you're only going to print 10 of these things, and the good thing about that is you're not sitting on tons of paper either. But if you only print 10 of these things, you could very much sort of create this sort of graded, if you will, pricing structure. So someone asked if John Buck is still creating today. He is. They are still very active. Both of them are still very, very active. In fact, his wife, Deborah Butterfield, is receiving the 2022 Lifetime Achievement Award from Sculpture Magazine. I'll hold it up. There she is on Sculpture Magazine. And she's receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award this year. So they're still happily making, mostly in Bozeman, Montana, but also in their studios in Hawaii. So here, let me see, I got a picture. Here's one of her galleries congratulating her on her, okay, there we go, on her Lifetime Achievement Award. So she is more well-known of the two artists, but it's interesting to kind of think of what their lives in studios feel like with the two of them, constantly creating, and both really kind of sculptors, even though one is also sort of a printmaker. And I didn't show all of the different types of sculpture that John Buck creates, but if you were to Google them, and I'm sure you could find much more there. So, are most of the other prints of Phoenix Rising in museums or in private collections? I don't know the answer to that question for sure. I know the one that was the finished print that was in the traveling show was in the Schnitzer family collection. So that was a private collection, but they've also founded a couple of museums now. And so it could very well have been given to one of the museums that bear their name. And of course, ours is in a public collection. There are only 10 of these prints, and I think I think there might even still be 1 or 2 that are available out of that series of 10. So I think that's still possible. I think if you go to Sharks Inc., they are one of his dealers. I think they might still have a Phoenix Rising there. So it might be, so there might still be 1 available. So I don't think they're all placed at this point. But my guess would be that there's going to be a mixture between private and public collections.
So what's the number of the museum's print?
I do not remember off the top of my head. I mean, it's a good question, but I don't think I have that with me. No, I don't. I'm going to guess that it was in that middle section of 3. So somewhere 4, 5, or 6, I'm going to guess. But that's just really kind of a guess, but I don't think it was in the first 3. And we do have that on the database, but I don't have that open right now. So
it looks like it's available. Price on request.
Yeah.
For Sharks Inc.
Yeah. And I think they probably have other works by him too. So if you were interested in Buck, you can, and very nice. I believe that's where our print came from, with Sharks Inc. So it's very nice. It's a very nice, and they have lots of really interesting artists. So it's actually a website worth playing around and digging around in. Any other questions? So tune in. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this has been great. Thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome. You're most welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Kate Kuhn, our curator, will be up next month, and she's going to look at our bust of Caracalla from our Roman collection, which is on view. And that's going to be the topic that she's going to be looking at in the One Night Stand next month. So, and again, we'll send out reminders. If you receive our weekly e-blast, you'll get a reminder there. Or if you follow us on Facebook, you'll see it posted there as well. But we don't have the winter spring plotted out yet. We're still, this is only time number 3. We just want to make sure that people really want this, that they're interested in this. And then we do record these and we do post them on our YouTube channel, along with all of our other recordings. And a fair number of people do take a look at them afterwards, because they can't necessarily join at the time that we're doing it. So we take that into consideration as well. So, but we know that we'll do Caracalla in December for sure. And I invite you back for that. And then just gonna keep your eyes up for other programs that we're doing. We're also doing a Zoom series called Grant Wood in Focus, which is quarterly. I'm looking at a different aspect of Grant Wood's life and career, and that there's going to be one coming up in December as well. And Kate gets to do that one as well. And so a couple presentations by Zoom in December, if you're interested, if the holidays don't consume all of your time. Well, thank you all for joining me today, and look forward to seeing you on a future Zoom presentation or in the museum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sean.